Good evening. Welcome to the Indiana University Cinema Virtual Screening Room. This event features live captioning. To turn on captions on Zoom for the conversation, move your mouse to the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, click on Live Transcript, and click Show Subtitle. If you have any issues, please feel free to ask a question using the Q&A box, which you can reach by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. My name is Alyssa Brooks, and I'm the Marketing and Programming Coordinator at IU Cinema. Before we begin, we wish to acknowledge and honor the Miamyaki, Lenape, Bodewadmik, and Sawanwa people on whose ancestral homelands and resources Indiana University Bloomington is built. On behalf of the entire IU Cinema team, I'd like to thank you for joining us for our final event of 2021, the monthly movie roundup virtual edition, which with our wonderful publications editor, Michaela Owens, and A Place for Film blog contributors, David Carter, Laura Ivins, Jack Miller, and Jesse Pasternack. We are so excited to have them all here tonight. To start us off, I'll introduce Michaela Owens, who will then introduce our bloggers. Before I do, just a quick reminder that you can also submit a question to the A Place for Film team at any time during tonight's conversation via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As I mentioned, Michaela Owens is IU Cinema's publications editor. An IU graduate with a BA in Communication and Culture and an MA in Cinema and Media Studies, she never stops thinking about classic Hollywood thanks to her mother's introduction to it, and she likes to believe she is an expert on Katharine Hepburn and Esther Williams. Please welcome Michaela Owens.
Hello, thanks Alyssa, and thank you to everyone watching for joining us this evening. The monthly movie roundup was an idea that came from one of our original contributors, Nate Sexton, and it's been really great every month to find out what everyone's been watching, to learn about films that we wouldn't have known about otherwise. We love sharing this written feature as a virtual event, and I know we're all excited to do it again tonight, so let's meet the bloggers. David Carter is a co-founder of Cicada Cinema, as well as a co-host and producer of A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. David's love of film ranges from Speed Racer to The Holy Mountain to Do the Right Thing to everything far away and in between. He is also the man I lovingly, will say that, refer to as the bane of my existence. So
you mean this man?
This man. Precisely because of that, everything going on there. All right. So
howdy, ma'am. Howdy, everybody.
Absolutely not. You have to leave. We're done. Show's over. Okay. So, scene stealer. Let's move on to our next blogger. All right. So Laura Ivins loves stop motion, home movies, imperfect films, nature hikes, and Stephen Crane's poetry. She has a PhD from IU and an MFA from Boston University. In addition to watching and writing about movies, sometimes she also makes them. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Jack Miller enjoys the films of Howard Hawks, Jacques Tourneur, and John Ford. He graduated from IU with a BA in English and currently resides in Chicago. At some point, oh, there we are. All right. Jesse Pasternack is a graduate of IU, where he was co-president of the Indiana Student Cinema Guild. He also wrote about film, TV, and pop culture for IDS. An aspiring professional writer-director. His own film work has appeared at Campus Movie Fest and the Anthology Film Archives in New York City. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Michaela. I love the Christmas behind you.
Thank you.
So
I go overboard every time. Have to do it. So I know we're all anxious to talk to each other about these movies because we were already getting started last night. So I guess we'll kick it off with David. So up first, we are going to show the trailer for David's choice, The Hateful Eight.
what make a man brave a blizzard, kill in cold blood? I'm sure I don't know. You'd be surprised what a man would do. You starting to see pictures, ain't you? Got room for one more?
I ain't too anxious to be handing out rides.
Real trusting fella, huh?
Not so much. Ain't no way I'm spending a couple of nights under a roof with somebody I don't know who they are. So who are you? Okay, everybody, hear this. I'm taking this woman to hang. Reward's $10,000. That money's mine, boys.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Hold on! You think I'm in cahoots with that fella or her?
That's my problem, boy. I don't know. One of them fellas will kill everybody in here.
Now we're talking.
Let's slow it down. Let's slow it way down.
When you get to hell, tell them Daisy sent you.
You gon' die now?
No one said this job's supposed to be easy.
Nobody said it's supposed to be that hard, neither.
Okay, Clint Eastwood over here. Why did you pick this movie? And did you realize this is the second film in a row you've chosen for a virtual event that has Channing Tatum in it?
Yeah, absolutely. I realized that, Michaela. Just want to speak clearly into the microphone that, yes, I realized Channing Tatum's in this movie.
Okay.
My husband. Anyway.
Mazel tov.
Yes, this is The Hateful Eight. It is Quentin Tarantino's 8th out of his supposedly 10 films he'll be making. I still doubt the validity of that statement. But I brought this film in particular because for me, this is part of my twisted catalog of Christmas films that make me feel right at home. And I brought it because, we're back in person at the IU Cinema, and this is like one of like my favorite cinematic memories that I've had in like the past 10 years of my life. I was lucky enough to go to the Music Box Theater back in December of 2015 to see this at a like sold out show. I went with the co-founder of Whirligig Games, who's also my best friend, and he and his wife and a bunch of other people were there. The crowd was electric. The script had been kind of leaked, and there had been a table reading of it, months, years prior to actually getting a release, because Quentin Tarantino threw a big hissy fit and said he wasn't going to release the movie because the script leaked. And just seeing that with like a sold out crowd in 70 millimeter, a format I had never seen before, and I don't think I've seen since. Got to see it on film. Got the first time I ever got to go to the Music Box, which is a great venue. I'm sure Jack can attest to that. Yeah, I mean, it's the one downside to living in Bloomington. We don't have a Music Box theater, but that is like one of like my favorite movie memories of all time. All the way down to walking out of the theater and my friend Audrey, who had been very, very quiet during the movie, reacting to nothing, as me and my friend Drew just kind of being like, that was insane, that was great. Her just like turning to us and just being like, I hated that. And that set the tone for what I thought was just like a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. People have talked about this for years. lo and behold, didn't realize that it had I was such a vocal minority about this movie. People largely consider this to be Quentin Tarantino's worst film. And for me, this is like a top 3 film. This is a film that I would say is his like most mature movie he's made since Jackie Brown. It's part of and the reason I want to talk about it is because he is currently on this revisionist streak that started with Inglourious Bastards, where he's just been taking a genre and a time period based out of real life in revising American history or a world history in some way. So with Inglourious Bastards, you got a revenge film against Nazis for Jews. With Django Unchained, there's this superhero movie about slavery. And then recently he did his kind of fairy tale movie with Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And the reason that I love this movie so much is because it sits in this revisionist kick he's been on. And it's a revisionist Western. And Jack, please correct me if I'm wrong. Revisionist Western, just kind of taking the Western. It was very popular in the 70s. And it's essentially like peeling back the American myth of the West. And like you're seeing heroes as they actually are. I think Red River is considered like a proto-revisionist Western. You know, the characters are not so black and white. They're very gray. They're very complex. And this is Quentin Tarantino's attempt at that. And I like Django Unchained. I like every Quentin Tarantino movie. I like Django Unchained, but the reason that movie never sat right by me is because it is a fantasy. Like he blows up the plantation at the end of that movie, but there is no, but like it's not something like obviously the same as like Hitler being murdered and stuff like that. It feels hollow. It feels more hollow than it is like a wish fulfillment thing. Like he's blowing up a concept and not killing a specific person in that movie. And for me, this movie as a Western works so much better because it is truthful. Like these are 8 despicable people. It's a microcosm movie. People kind of misunderstand this movie. It's shot in 70 millimeter on the same lenses as it's a mad world. Apparently, they use the same lenses and camera equipment. And it's an incredible cast. It's a stage play that he shot on 70 millimeter. This is him cashing in his blank check after getting Christoph Waltz 2 Oscar nominations for playing the same role. Another reason I don't really like Django Unchained nearly as much as this movie. I think it has better performances, but he made like a stage play that is about the microcosm of this is how America actually is. And it weirdly, and this is weird to say about Quentin Tarantino because obviously he's had his problems with misogyny and the talks about race all in the past. Like it's interesting because he made this movie in 2015. It's months before the 2016, it's almost a full year out before the 2016 election. He's written it years prior to that. And it's kind of this prescient movie about like the intersection of race and sex in America and people speaking openly and honestly about how they feel about the race of other people. Like none of the 8 they hold some prejudice of some sort. Like even characters who are murdered in a flashback on screen, they've offhandedly mentioned like Minnie hates Mexicans. Like is a complex movie. And the reason I like it is because I wanted to talk about this concept of 2 things can be true at the exact same time. Yes, Quentin Tarantino has a problem with women and the use of the N-word in his movies and things like that. But he's also giving actors like Samuel Jackson and Jennifer Jason Leigh like the most interesting roles of their entire career that they weren't being offered at that point. There's a reason Samuel Jackson keeps coming back to work with him. He finds something interesting in the material. He's not making $20 million on each of these movies. Like that's certainly not the case. And I don't know, like this, I just think a lot of people in this movie give like career best performances. And it's just crazy that he found a way to like thread the needle between an Agatha Christie book, The Thing, and Rio Bravo and Paul Verhoeven's Flesh and Blood into like one movie. And so that is why I have brought The Hateful Eight to this monthly movie roundup. And because, yeah, some Christmases you do feel like you're trapped in a cabin, snowstorm with people you don't like. And that's just how it is for some people. So, yeah. Any questions, anybody?
I'm glad you mentioned stage play because while I was watching it, I kept thinking that this would potentially even work better as a play. than as a movie.
Yeah.
Particularly once we get to the cabin. I admit I didn't quite care for the first half hour. I thought it was very exposition heavy, and I'm not a huge fan of that. But once we get into the cabin, I thought it would that would make an interesting play. I didn't love it as a movie, but
Nope. This was not a fun time for Michaela.
Is your Michaela, is your dislike of the movie the material or is it the form of the movie?
I think maybe the form. I like Tarantino. I've seen at least half of his movies. It's just this was so long, and I hate long movies. The pacing was killing me. It took me 3 sittings to watch this movie because I just couldn't hang. I just couldn't do it. And also, like, I don't love seeing a woman getting repeatedly punched in the face, and it just made me feel icky sometimes, but that's just me.
When these Tarantino revisionist history movies started coming out, like beginning with Inglourious Bastards, I initially felt like I didn't really like them because, like, for that reason, because the revisionist history kind of bent of them, I was just sort of like, is this like a responsible way of dealing with history and that kind of thing? And I felt that way for Inglourious Bastards, Django Unchained, and this movie. But then when the newer one, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, came out, at the, like, I don't know if you guys have all seen that one yet, but at the end, I really liked it. Like, I really liked how he revised history in that one. So I was kind of like, maybe I've been wrong about this and don't actually understand what Tarantino's trying to do with this project that he's embarked on. I don't know if you have other thoughts about that, David.
Yeah, I mean, as far as, I mean, to a certain extent, it kind of seems like 3 out of the 4 of these are just wish fulfillment movies, and like, you know, they're all taking like different forms. Like, obviously, like Inglourious Bastards is like his Wild Bunch, Guns of Navarone movie, and like he's just trying to rewrite history, so there's like a, you know, slightly more positive outcome to it. And then for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, that one's interesting because he legitimately seems like he's just sad that this person passed away, you know, was murdered before their like, you know, before we got to see everything they got to do. It seems like his sentimental dad movie, honestly, which is crazy to think about. He made like a 3-hour movie about, you know, the late 60s, and that's his sentimental dad movie. Yeah, and like I already spoke my piece on Django Unchained, that's just like a superhero movie, which I do like that movie a ton. I've seen it so many times. I just think this in relation to that, because it's kind of interesting that he made these like kind of back to back. It's almost like he made a response movie to himself, because it seems like he kind of realized himself. He's like, well, there are no black, you know, there were black cowboys, but like, as in he's like, well, there are no black cowboys who saved, you know, who like freed a bunch of slaves or like blew up a plantation or anything like that. The reality of this thing is just like, there are black people in America dying, and they have all the odds stacked against them. And one of my favorite parts about this movie, one of my favorite elements in like a movie ever, is the whole Lincoln letter through line. This like lie, this comforting lie that everyone wants to tell themselves to like kind of bypass like the awful things that they think about every other person, to the extent, and I guess spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, even when everyone knows the letter is a lie, they read the letter to comfort themselves as they're all dying. And like, if there isn't a more apt metaphor for like America in 2021, or like America as we're like embroiled in like, you know, racial violence with like the police and things like that, and people constantly turning to things like The Help or Driving Miss Daisy or whatever, like just to Green Book, just to feel like a little bit of comfort. Like, I don't know, y'all. Like, I think the band put it down, and I think people are just. I think like, and this isn't a criticism at you, Michaela. Like the form, I mean the actual content of the film is hard to watch. Like Jennifer Jason Leigh is getting the ever living crap beat out of her for like the entirety of this movie, And it kind of comes to the ending of this movie, which I go back and forth on all the time, which is I hate reading it as black and white as this, but it seems he's like America, while its racial problems are are deep and ingrained and ugly, the one thing we can rally around is just spitting and stepping on and kicking women at that's something we rally on. And not that this is a Hillary Clinton movie, but it is kind of interesting that you have this very Trump-esque oh my God, Kurt Russell character, which obviously he's riffing on his McCready character from The Thing, but like you have that, and then you have this woman, and no one's good in the movie, just like no presidential candidates are actually good, but it is kind of interesting that he like got there before everybody else, and he probably didn't even have those specific people in mind while he was writing this movie. So
there's one thing you said, David, that I'd love to get your take on, which is that there aren't any real good characters. Like even, Minnie, who's kind of like a more, positive character. She hates Mexicans and everybody's, done terrible things. But I found with watching it with certain people, you get different reactions and different takes. Like I watched it with some friends when I was still at IU, and my friend Hannah was watching. She just hated it. Michaela, she agreed with you. She didn't like how he was treating the women and all the violence against them. But she loved Chris Mannix, the Walton Goggins character. And we all fell into this rhythm of like whenever he would do anything Walton Gogginsy, we would like lose it and we would love it. And there's this moment where he's like yelling at Joe Gage. He's like, "I knew it! I knew you were lying!" And we were all laughing. So I was wondering, yeah, I did.
He becomes like Flava Flav at one point where he's just like hype manning everything Samuel Jackson says, and I like lose my mind.
He's like, "You're right, yeah." And I was wondering, David, on this viewing and in general, which one do you like the best, or which one do you dislike the least, and does it change when you revisit?
Well, it's funny. It's the Hateful Eight, and there actually is one character that's not included in the 8, and that's OB, who's a sweet boy who has to get sent out to the storm every time to go do things. So that's why it's not the Hateful 9. Like there is one legitimately. Well, you don't know a lot about him, but he seems okay. But as far as like, Samuel Jackson is clearly the lead of this movie. I know it's supposed to be a two-hander with Kurt Russell, and like they pull the rug from under you at one point in the movie. But I would say, like, of all the characters, like, yeah, I guess Walton Goggins is probably was my favorite on rewatch. Not just because I think he gives like a very underrated performance, and obviously Jennifer Jason Leigh gives an incredible performance in this movie. I think it's because he's so unrepentant about everything in the movie, and I like the fact that this movie is ambiguous about you never find out if he was actually going to be the sheriff of that town. There's a lot of doubt cast over that, but the way he plays it is like if he's lying, he's lied so well that he believes it at this point. Yeah. And so that's the little detail I liked watching this time. I've talked for way too long, but
you sure have.
So that is my piece. If there are more questions later, people can ask me.
Yeah, no, you're fine. All right, so up next we have Laura's pick, She. All right, so pretty different from Hateful Eight. So Laura, you actually, we both realized you wrote about this film for a previous roundup. Oops, oh well. But what is it about She that grabs your attention?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm just like a huge fan of stop motion animation. um, One of the things that I really enjoy about animation that uses like actual objects is the way that the meanings of those objects kind of get repurposed and carry on like a lot of allegorical meaning. So, in this one you have you very quickly see like which shoes are feminine and which are masculine. There's not really a question. There's like this nice synecdoche that objects can like perform in an animated film because they are already so saturated with meaning. I also think that like there's a lot of universal themes that can be communicated where even though like the objects are of a time, the film itself can kind of feel timeless because you have you don't have like a real location with real actors that are conveying I don't know, something that's more like site specific or country specific, with like a red pump and like a man's dress shoe. Those are signs that exist across many different cultures across the world. Um, and and so like the themes of like the patriarchy and industrialization and like exploitative capitalism, like even though this is a Chinese film, China still participates in global capitalism and those themes are still in this film. I just really enjoy how well the objects communicate. And then it's just really the design and the movement, everything is just so fun and intricate, and like the violence feels very cruel and poignant, even though it's just like a shoe that's having screws screwed into it. You still like just feel for her, and you feel so much empathy for this red pump, and you feel so sad when she's like trying to take care of her baby and her baby's like hungry and she can't feed it. And I mean, there's just, I don't know, I love how like animation can kind of almost like play this trick on us where we're having all these feelings for shoes and objects, and I don't know, I really enjoy that about independent animation, how it can like do that and play on our mimetic impulses in a really interesting way.
It actually, this is random, but it reminded me of the shoe in Who Framed Roger Rabbit that Christopher Lloyd puts in the dip.
Yeah, and it's like struggling against the dip, and it's like so scared, and yeah, you really like, dude, you really feel for that shoe in Roger Rabbit. It's a shoe, but it's a living shoe, it's a sentient shoe, and we just have this like impulse in human brains that if something is exhibiting like emotion and intention, we empathize with it. And yeah, we don't want it to be in pain, we feel sympathy. Yeah, this is also very bleak. The ending is not, it's not optimistic.
I was gonna ask Laura, when you because this is the exact opposite of my film, is a lot of show and all show, no tell to this movie. And so when you're watching a movie like this, which I loved, would like, are you, when you're first, like, I don't know how many times you've seen it, but like, are you able to pick up like the symbolic things that are like happening on screen as they're happening, or do you like to let it wash over you as you are just like admiring like the animation and things like that? Because there's like things like I've obviously picked on watching it, but like when they started producing cherries, like I was like, well, I don't know how to interpret that. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what your thought process is like watching a movie like this.
Yeah, so I kind of approach this film like I would approach like a surrealist film, like, or something like The Brothers Quay, where I mean, this one, I feel like it's fairly didactic. The themes of like the cultural critiques of like patriarchal oppression on women, that comes across immediately in the first like 15 minutes. That's very clear. The critiques of industrialization and exploiting labor, that I think also comes across pretty clear. But I really love kind of the surrealist approach where like movies, like art does not exist to be decoded. Like it's not a puzzle where you find like the perfect exact answer for every image on screen. And so, you know, when I'm looking at it, like some of the things I kind of accept in a more emotive way, or kind of like what Jan Schwankmeyer calls analogical thinking, where, you know, I'm thinking about like how images relate to each other, and kind of the broader themes that I'm teasing out because of my own perspective and cultural context, but it's not necessarily like the definitive answer to the film. So yeah, films like this, like there may be themes that we can agree on, but there's not like one answer to like why the bottle caps, you know, why did he choose bottle caps to eat away, you know, the leather on her shoes? What is the exact meaning of the cigarettes? You know, there's, you know, things we can say about organic versus like machine. There's some things we can say about masculinity and femininity, but that, I don't know, I wouldn't take a decoder ring to all the imagery in the film, I guess.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing too that I've thought about a lot in relation to cinema is how like within films movement can be very emotional, and how like whether that could be like a camera movement in an Orson Welles film, or like, you know, Gene Kelly's body moving and Singing in the Rain. And I think that, or I wonder if that has a lot to do with what you like about stop motion, because I haven't personally studied animated cinema as much as I have live action cinema, but you know, I just thought about that because you were talking about how you felt so much identification with the plight of the shoe in this movie and all that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a background in animation, like I've made animated films. So when I'm watching in stop motion in particular, so when I'm watching a stop motion film, like I am sometimes thinking like, oh, how they do that one, you know, and kind of like noticing the little details of, you know, like object animation, like replacement animation is really common. So like, how do you make things move by replacing one object with another object, but it's completely different, like there's no continuity of the object itself. So like an example is like when there's a scene where her leaves are being cut off and they fall to the ground, and they're like vinyl fake leaves when they're being cut, and then they fall as the vinyl fake leaf, but as it disintegrates it becomes it's like a succession of real leaves that are dried out. So he essentially, how he makes that is like he takes away the vinyl leaf, puts down like a dried leaf, takes away the dried leaf, puts down like an even more dried leaf, and then like crumbles it up. So there's something about like that kind of discontinuity with object animation where, and you even see this with like commercial stop motion where we were kind of talking about before, where like the face is different. So like to animate a stop motion face, a lot of times you take the whole face off and put a whole new face on. And I find that really fascinating, that that's how you create movement and expression so frequently, that you have like this off screen, off camera, the discontinuous body that's so expressive in that replacement process. That was probably maybe too inside baseball of an answer, but
No, I loved it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think animators are, and I mean this with love, Lord, some of the most insane people on earth. I don't know how you do it. The process you just described just sounds like torture to me, but I value it.
Very meditative.
Very meditative. Okay, yeah,
yeah, you kind of get like into a zone where you're just like, you know, it's like move, click, move, click, move, click. And so it's like very, I don't know, you really, you get lost in the process when you're doing it. Yeah. But it is, you have to have patience. Yeah, I love how you can create so much expression from tiny movements. And you see this with like film acting too, where like an actor like Django Unchained, not Django Unchained, but Hateful Eight was a great example of this. There's a lot of really nice micro expressions on the actors' faces. And I love when tiny movement communicates really big things. And I think that's something that a lot of independent animation excels at. Just little things that make us feel a lot.
Beautiful.
And
go ahead, Jesse.
sorry,
I
just
thought we
one
were gonna.
quick thing. You mentioned that this was a very bleak film, Laura, and I've noticed that animation around the world, like Watership Down and Plague Dog, seems to be a little more depressing than American animation. I was just curious if you had a theory about that.
Well, I would say like independent animation will tend to tackle darker themes than commercial animation. So I think it's not a distinction between like American and not American, but more a distinction between commercial and independent. Because I mean, animation is American animation certainly like dominates a lot of what gets theatrically released worldwide. But even like when you look at like TV animation or a lot of what's produced around the world tends to be geared toward that more like family or child audience, not exclusively, but that's a big part of the animation audience across the world. And independent animators tackle a range of themes. So there are actually some like really sweet, like more saccharine examples of independent animation. But I think, when anytime you're working, just like with live action film, outside of giant studio systems where you have to make $500 million in order for your film not to be a complete financial failure. If you're working on that smaller scale and you're on the festival circuit instead of, the multiplex circuit, you just have more freedom in what you can do with the format and what you can do with your themes. And that's absolutely true of the world of animation.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great. So for our next selection, we have Jack's choice, which is George Stevens' nostalgic drama, I Remember Mama.
As long as I could remember, the house on the Larkin Street hill had been home. Papa and Mama had both been born in Norway. All of us were born here. Mel's the oldest, my sister Christine, and the littlest sister, Dagmar. But first and foremost, I remember Mama, with her very secret bank account and a wide open heart for other people's troubles.
Martha, I want to get married.
Isn't this wonderful?
Yeah, I think it is.
Who is
Mr. Torkelson.
from the funeral parlor?
Will you help me tell the others? And Uncle Chris?
But so what is? What do you want?
Well, it was a question of Trina's dowry.
Her what?
Dowry.
Her dowry. So Trina wants dowry? She's 42 years old.
Uncle Chris.
You enjoying that stew, David, that you keep just munching on over there?
Boy, gotta eat.
Watch out for the coffee, okay?
Just
all
get
right.
to Jack and I Remember Mama.
Oh my God, I swear. All right, Jack, why did you want to recommend this film?
Yeah, so I chose this film because I don't think it gets enough attention these days. And also, I think the form or the tradition that this film sits within of kind of the sentimental, episodic family drama is also sort of out of fashion now. I mean, sometimes I watch like classic Hollywood movies like Rear Window or like Rio Bravo or whatever, and I think like, oh my gosh, this film is so modern. I remember Mama is not modern, you know, it reeks of 1948. And yet I really like a lot of things about this film. Like, first of all, this is a George Stevens film, and it was his first post-war film. So his best known films from before the war are much more lighthearted, you know, films like Swing Time, the Astaire and Rogers movie, as well as like Gunga Din, which is an adventure film, and The More the Merrier, which is a rom-com. And then he stopped making movies for pretty much the entire duration of World War II. The More the Merrier in 43 is his last movie before I Remember Mama in 48. And in general, the movies that he makes after the war are more serious, darker. A Place in the Sun and Shane are probably his most famous post-war films. But I Remember Mama is a period piece, and it's set in San Francisco around the turn of the century. Stevens himself was born in Oakland, but a lot of his youth was spent in San Francisco. So I think it's partially, even though it's an adaptation, I think it's partially like near and dear to him at the very least, the material. And one thing that I really like about this movie is that it's a memory film in the sense that it's not just a period piece, but it's a film in which the past is sort of comes alive and the past is like inseparable from the emotions that it's suffused with. And when I was watching this film, I was sort of like thinking about that in relation to 40s cinema, because it's a device that you see also in like Ford's How Green Was My Valley. And you can also sort of see it in like straight period pieces like Wells's The Magnificent Ambersons and even Minnelli's Meet Me in St. Louis. All four of these films are like family ensembles, but they're also memory films. And I just really like that form. This is also, I Remember Mama is also, it's a really episodic film. You know, it's not like there's just a straight rising action resolution, that sort of thing. It's like we sort of just go from one episode in the family's life to another, and sometimes, you know, they're sad, sometimes they feel like they have to put their daughter's cat down, and other times the mom's breaking into a hospital to check on her baby daughter. So, you know, this is not the kind of film in which there's any distance between Stevens and the characters. He's not offering a critique of these characters like, you know, like in a Nicholas Ray movie like Rebel Without a Cause, Nicholas Ray's obviously trying to critique the nuclear family, but in this movie, Stevens is just inviting us to live with this family and their joys and sorrows in a way that is totally sincere and in a way that is not present in a lot of contemporary cinema. It seems like in almost all contemporary cinema, and this isn't always a bad thing, but it just seems that there's almost always some sort of distancing devices in relation to how the director feels about the characters. I saw this movie, so the first time, this is my grandmother's favorite movie, and my grandmother's mother, my great-grandmother, was a Norwegian immigrant, and my dad showed me this movie for the first time when I was like 10, and my dad really likes the movie too. I think that his mom showed it to him, and the first time I watched this movie, I was not properly reverent of this movie. I was like, oh, that was okay. But like, then when I went to a film festival in Bologna this summer, they were doing a George Stevens series, and I really learned that I like George Stevens a lot because of this series. But I re-saw the movie there, and I saw it on 35 millimeter, and I was like, this is such a beautiful movie. I love it so much. And it was just like such a special experience being able to see it again and kind of revising my feelings about it. I also just really like the way Stevens shoots this movie. I mean, so much of the film is set in the home, the set that they use as the home. And, you know, like I love the low ceilings. He uses mirrors sometimes in the shots in a way that kind of reminds me of Magnificent Ambersons as well, but in a way that is unique and is really gorgeously done. And I feel like in some strange way, the staircase of the house set becomes kind of central. Like, you know, it's just it's a centering thing that he uses that's in so many of the shots. But I'm curious to hear what you guys thought of this film, or if you guys had seen it before.
I did watch this movie. I'd never heard of it until you had like you brought it up for this event. And I immediately fell in love with it. It's like one of the warmest movies I've gotten to see this year. And the nostalgia part of it is why I enjoyed it so much. I mean, that and like the clear Little Women influence on the movie. But the nostalgia part I enjoy because I'm very picky about how not just how nostalgia is portrayed in movies, but like our relationship to nostalgia. And my favorite things that deal with nostalgia tend to be the ones that kind of come back to this like idea that I remember reading in high school, which was, and I still can't remember this poem. I can find it when I Google it, but it's this like concept that like a smell or a touch or like something that you do like will immediately like awaken a memory from like your childhood and like send you back to that just because you like sniffed a particular thing or touched something or tasted something. And like this movie feels like it's like made from like that same cloth where it's like I'm getting sense memory for things that like I never experienced, but like it's taking me back to like certain points in like my childhood. And like I forget the dark Hungarian's uncle's name, which caught me off guard. I'm sorry.
Chris.
Yeah, Uncle Chris. Like, yeah, like that just immediately took me back to like my grumpy uncle who, you know, like everyone was like, he's scary, like don't talk to him, don't mess with him. And then, you know, you get old and you realize like, oh, it's just like a big softy. He just doesn't want to have like deal with people ever. And I don't know, I love it for that. So thank you for bringing this.
I love this movie too, Jack. Thank you so much for recommending it. One thing I'd like to add to what you were saying, which was great about how George Stevens' movies after the war are darker. One reason for that is that George Stevens was a member of the Signal Corps during World War II, and he actually filmed some of the most graphic footage of the concentration camps after, in particular, the liberation of Dachau. He filmed really, really graphic stuff that was actually used to convict a lot of high-level Nazis. And when he comes back from the war, a lot of his films later, especially Shane, are very dark. But this one, which I enjoyed a lot, was very warm and nostalgic. You could feel him trying to just be like, all right, I saw something really bad. Let's go to my memories. Let's try to make something happy, and, you know, about kids and stuff. And I agree with you that it's very 40s and its narrative and thematic concerns and how it's shot. But there are also some really strikingly modern cinematography that I really enjoyed. And there's one great shot where older Catherine, the daughter in the film, she's just finished her book and she's looking and she imagines her younger self writing. And it's like she's watching a movie of her memories and the camera just kind of tracks forward to go into the past. And that just blew me away. I was wondering if you have a particular favorite shot in the film.
Honestly, towards the end, when the uncle's dying, I think that a lot of the shots around the little farm that they go out to are, those always kind of stick in my mind. Possibly because it's like one of the longest sequences in the film that's not set in and around their home. But yeah, I'd probably have to like review the images to pick out like a specific image. But yeah, the recollection of that scene is always like really powerful for me.
I was really interested in what you said about the sincerity of the film and how there was that lack of distance, which, you know, in that post-war period, we did have a number of melodrama directors that were doing that critique of family. And I wonder, part of the reason is that we're, you know, in so many of the critiques are kind of about like bourgeois, middle class, upper class families. But here we're looking at an immigrant family. Everyone in the family works, and one of the things about a lot of working class or immigrant families is that everyone in the family participates in the success of the family, like as a whole. Whereas part of the issue with the nuclear family is that people, at least in like the critiques we see in the post-war period, is that individual family members kind of become islands within the home, where there's a lot of barriers and lack of interaction between them. Whereas, in this case, this was a family culture where, like we're all pitching in so that the older son can go to high school, like everyone's chipping in. And at every step of the way, everyone's chipping in to lift everyone up. Like the family is successful as a communal unit. They're not necessarily successful individually. Even like the daughter who becomes like the successful writer, she's successful because her family supported her, and then she also has there's like that reciprocity that we don't see in like the post-war nuclear family and films of the same period.
I think that's a great point, Laura, is sort of like maybe the implicit like class consciousness of this film, and whether Stevens was conscious of that or not, I think that just makes me love the film even more. I mean, it's a beautiful detail, because like I rewatched Meet Me in St. Louis last night, which there's actually a lot of points of comparison, even though I Remember Mama is not a musical, but here's a movie about another family like right around the same time period, the early 1900s. But in that case, it's like a really wealthy family that lives in this mansion in St. Louis. And I mean, there's certainly a lot of warmth in Meet Me in St. Louis, but I don't think that there isn't like any criticisms being made. So yeah, that's a great point.
All right, so we're going to move on to our next movie, which is Jesse's pick, the Yuletide classic, The Muppet Christmas Carol.
Ah, humbug. He was the greediest man alive.
It's Ebenezer Scrooge.
Until the night he met someone extraordinary.
Hello.
The Muppet Christmas Carol.
I'll drink to Mr. Scrooge, even though he is odious, stingy, and badly dressed.
Humbug.
Oh, there goes Mr. Humbug. There goes Mr. Grin.
Do you think it's safe for us to be up here?
If they gave a prize for being mean, the winner would be him.
Yes, Mr. Cratchit.
If you please, Mr. Scrooge, the bookkeeping staff would like to have an extra shovel full of coal for the fire.
Such a frozen.
How would the bookkeepers like to be suddenly
Unemployed!
Heat wave! Oi! This is my island in the sun.
It's Charles Dickens' classic tale, as only the Muppets can tell it.
It's good to be heckling again. It's good to be doing anything again.
Filled with holiday warmth.
Hey, like the lamp, not the rat, like the lamp, not the rat.
And Christmas spirit.
Scrooge? Jacob Marley?
Oh, that's scary stuff. Should we be worried about the kids in the audience?
No, it's all right. This is culture.
This is the movie to see, to share, to cherish with someone you love.
Thank you for making me a part of this.
Walt Disney Pictures presents, from Jim Henson Productions, The Muppet Christmas Carol.
God bless us, everyone.
Whatever.
All right, so Jesse.
Yes.
I obviously know why the Muppet Christmas Carol. I mean, it's amazing, but why this movie?
So I'm a very big fan of the Muppets, and everything Muppety I really enjoy. And in terms of Muppet movies, this is near the top of the list for me because it really exemplifies what makes a Muppet movie great. And one thing that makes it great is obviously the humor, great slapstick, great jokes, a lot of great pure comedy, but it's also very much true to the characters. Like every single casting decision they make for which Muppet is which character is perfect. I mean, Statler and Waldorf as the Marleys, obvious, old misers, old hecklers, perfect. Kermit as Bob Cratchit, perfect. Tiny Tim as Robin as Tiny Tim, like one of the best ones in the movie. But in addition to just the pure comedy, it also has a bunch of Muppet elements I enjoy. One of the most important of which is the Muppets putting on a show. Like in the Muppet Show, it's obviously them putting on, a show and, putting on a variety act. But here it's them kind of like, not quite making their own movie, but it's very much them putting on the show of A Christmas Carol. And there's one of my favorite jokes in the movie is that Sam the Eagle plays young Scrooge, one of young Scrooge's mentors. And he says something like, make money, it's the American way, because Sam the Eagle is ultra American. And Gonzo, as Charles Dickens, the narrator, goes over to him, and he whispers in his ear, and Sam the Eagle, like an actor flubbing his line, just goes, I mean, it's the British way. And you could just leave the joke there, and that would be funny. But what makes that moment really land is Gonzo pats him on the shoulder and just goes, good. Like he's a director, like teaching him how to do the line properly. And it's a great beat. And one other thing that I love about the Muppets that most people don't realize is that their stuff is like great, not just because it's funny, but because they treat it like they're doing Shakespeare. And like you really care about the characters, and they approach the story with sincerity and seriousness and make you care about everybody. And that all of that is very much embodied in Michael Caine's performance as Scrooge. And I love him in this movie because he treats it like he's in a National Theater production of A Christmas Carol. And he just commits, and he's like one of the best Scrooges because he's being very sincere and honest, and like you hate him and then you care for him and then you love him. And there's a moment where, not to spoil anything, but Beaker, one of the silliest Muppets and one of my favorites, gives him a scarf. And in like a lesser production, like it'd just be kind of like, a funny moment, like, Beaker saying something funny and giving him the scarf. But here it's like the first gift Scrooge has gotten in his entire life. And Michael Caine plays that moment properly, where he's like on the verge of tears and he's just like happily thanks him. And it's like a sign that his change is permanent and he's going to be a good person. So that I just adore. One thing I love about many things I love about this movie, but another thing that really makes it Muppety is that Paul Williams wrote all of the songs. And Paul Williams is a songwriter who had originally written all the songs for the Muppet movie. And he hadn't written songs for a Muppet movie since the Muppet movie. So this was his return to working with the Muppets. And all of the songs are great and warm and like even emotional. There's a great song, When Love Is Gone, that they cut. The scene where they sing it is cut, but you can go online from the movie, but you can go online and watch it on YouTube, which I always pause the movie and watch it because it's great. And another fun little side fact about Paul Williams, he's also an actor, and he's probably the only actor to work with Brian De Palma and Melvin Van Peebles, because he's in Watermelon Man and Phantom of the Paradise. And another thing that makes the movie really special is that it's the first Muppet film that Jim Henson wasn't involved with because he had passed away. And Richard Hunt, who played Scooter and a lot of other great Muppet characters, had also passed away. And there's this great title card when the movie begins in loving memory of Jim Henson and Richard Hunt. And there's a lot, especially at the end of the year, it's normal to be reflective and think about what you're going to do next year and, what you're doing. And there's a lot of different ways you can kind of carry on for someone and carry on their legacy and use it to kind of, your legacy to kind of help you, go about the world and stuff. And one of the things I love about this movie is that you can really feel Jim and Richard's spirits, Jim in particular, throughout the film. And you can really see that Jim taught them a lot about love and kindness and how to be a person. And it's just in terms of beginning the next year afresh and carrying on the lessons of people we love who are not here. It's just a really great reminder that you can take what you love about those people and kind of use them as a fuel to kind of carry on throughout your year.
It's really nice, Jesse. I lost my grandpa this year, so that was,
sorry.
I really appreciate it. No, now you're going to make me cry. Gosh dang it. And I thought David would be my problem child. Okay.
I'm the dark horse. I'm the unexpected guest.
It's true. So I actually didn't grow up with the Muppets and didn't really, obviously I knew the Muppets, but I never really saw their movies until I was an undergrad at IU. And actually last year was the first time I saw this movie, Christmas Carol. And I just, as soon as Gonzo and Rizzo popped up, I was like, yes, I am in. Because I want them to follow me around and narrate my life. I don't need Morgan Freeman. I just want Gonzo and Rizzo because it is the best.
Yeah.
Like I am so glad that trailer had the part where he's using Rizzo to clean the
Yeah.
window, and he's like, "Thank you for making me a part of this," because it's my favorite part.
Same. That should be like a cameo. Sorry, it should be like a cameo service to have them follow you around and like, you know, instead of wish you happy birthday, just being like, Michaela was going about her day and she was doing.
That's all I need.
Yeah.
Michaela, like you, did not really grow up with the Muppets, and this was the first time I'd ever seen this movie. Despite a lot of my very good friends being like giant Jim Henson and Muppet people. I have a friend who made himself as a Muppet for a Halloween one year. And just a little fun fact, because I'm the physical media person, if you want the version of the Muppet Christmas Carol that has that song that Jesse mentioned, you can find it on the 20th anniversary DVD. And you want the you want the one that's the not the theatrical version. So just a fun fact for anybody who wants to watch that song that's very, very sad. Otherwise, I guess it just cuts to Rizzo and Gonzo just crying and being sad for no reason.
Yeah.
But
in the movie, Scrooge says, I love you. And she says, you did once. And then it just cuts to her walking and Rizzo crying. But it's better with the song.
yeah, it's a good song. But I love this. I gotta agree with my boy Guillermo del Toro. This is probably the best version of A Christmas Carol like I've ever seen.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so accurate to the play.
Yeah. There's a piece I love on Bright Wall Dark Room by a writer named Ethan Warren that says it's the best adaptation. And it's a very long piece, very intricate piece. But one of the main things is he's like, yeah, a lot of what Gonzo's saying is just from the Charles Dickens text. Like, it gets more of the actual Dickens text into its adaptation than any other Dickens version of the play.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse, is this your ultimate favorite Muppets masterpiece?
Oh, that's a great question, Jack. I think in terms of like as a cinematic experience, and like even if it's even better when you take the metatextual thing of like Jim's gone, he was like their guiding light, what do they do? And they were bound with one of the best movies ever. I think in terms of being a great Muppet film, I would say it's probably number one. But in terms of great Muppet time, I would have to say Muppet Treasure Island. Probably mostly for nostalgia value, because like my older brother and I, there's a roll call of all the pirates and we memorized it, so I can do all the other characters, like what they say. I've had that memorized since I was like 10. So in terms of Muppet good time, I'd say that's probably my favorite, mostly for nostalgia, but it holds up. And obviously there's the 70s and 80s ones, but I think Christmas Carol is the best as a movie.
I definitely had a smile on my face the whole time I was watching it. I was just like, this is great.
It's awesome.
Could I ask you, Jesse, and I think the answer is pretty obvious, is this, in addition to being the best Christmas Carol adaptation, is this also the best Ebenezer Scrooge that there's ever been on screen with Michael Caine?
Great question. I mean, he just blows the bloody doors off with this.
David, you're not allowed back.
That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get kicked. I'm trying to be the first person to ever get fired from a blog.
Do you have a different favorite Scrooge?
Oh, me or David?
Oh, I don't know. Michaela did the thumbs down.
Oh, because of his Michael Caine impersonation.
I would say that I don't know enough about other Scrooges, but I would say he's my personal favorite just because of like, it's tough to do the arc, like of, being, one thing to another in the confines of like a 90-minute movie. But like, he really tracks the arc of like Scrooge being, ultimate miser, terrible, but also a little redeemable because he gives them time off for Christmas, to being like the happiest, jolliest, humanitarian you'd ever want to meet. So in terms of just what he has to do, it's a very tall order. And the fact that he approaches it like he's doing a play in the West End and not like a silly children's thing is like what really gives the movie a lot of heft. There's also... Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Laura, just one tiny thing. They asked him once if he sang in a movie once. He said, yeah, I did with Kermit the Frog. Yes, Laura.
I was just agreeing, like he plays it straight. And it plays well against the Muppets, who do have these kind of like wink moments
Yeah.
It's enjoyable that Michael Caine is just like, I'm Scrooge.
Yeah.
All right, so for our last film of the evening, we have my choice, The Shop Around the Corner.
There you are. Ladies and gentlemen, permit me to introduce myself. I am Mr. Matuchek of Matuchek and Company, the shop around the corner. Now, if you'll be kind enough to take a look at the window, you'll see that we sell some very nice things. Of course, my shop may be a little far away for some of you. It's in Budapest, Hungary, just around the corner from Balta Street. But I'm sure that the bargains you get here will more than make your trip worthwhile. It's the kind of a shop where you get a $3.50 value for $3.48. And now, with your permission, I would like to introduce you to some of the people who work in my shop. First, I'd like you to get acquainted with my head salesman, Mr. Kralik, played by James Stewart. I can buy 24 of these cigarette boxes at Miklos Brothers. What do you think of it? I think it's great. Well, open it.
No, Mr. Matuchek, it's not for us.
But you haven't listened to it. It plays Ochichornia.
Even if it played Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, I'd still say no. No, I just don't like the idea.
My first sales lady is Clara Novak, played by the very charming Margaret Sullivan. She argues, too.
Listen, I sold as much goods yesterday as anybody else in the shop. 95 Pengo 50 isn't bad for a rainy Monday 3 weeks before Christmas. Did you tell that to Mr. Matuchek?
Yes, I did.
And what did he say?
He said, tell her not to come in that blouse anymore.
Tell him I won't.
I will.
Now, I want you to take a look at Mr. Perovich, played by Felix Bressart. He was one of the Russian comrades in Ninochka. He's the typical sales clerk who is always 10 minutes early.
Perovich, do you mind if I ask you a personal question?
No, go ahead.
It's very confidential.
Yeah, sure.
Suppose a fella like me wants to get married.
Well, that's wonderful. That's the best thing that could happen to you. Where's the girl?
Oh, wait a minute. What did I say? I said suppose. I said a fella like me. I did say me. Now, look, how much does it cost you to live? You and Mrs. Perovich, leaving out the children.
Oh, why fool yourself?
And now, I have a real treat for you. You are to meet the Beau Brummel of the shop, Mr. Vadash, played by Joseph Schildkraut. Everybody wonders where he gets the money to dress so elegantly. He certainly can't do it on the salary he gets from me. And no shop is complete without an errand boy. Meet Pepe, played by William Tracy.
Mr. Clark, do you think I have to work tonight, too? After all, I'm a child.
No, you don't have to stay.
You mean it?
I'll straighten it out with Mr. Matuchek.
Thanks, Mr. Clark.
So now you go to see your girlfriend. By the way, is it serious?
Yes, very.
Maybe we'll both be engaged Monday.
I think we will.
I don't want you to misunderstand me. I just said in my case it might happen.
Well, as a matter of fact, I can tell you it will happen.
Oh, I thought you were a customer. I should have known better. However, every disappointment has its bright side. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Ernst Lubitsch, our director. The man who gave you a Garbo in Ninochka who made you laugh, and who now gives you a Morgan who makes you laugh.
I hope.
Yes, I hope so, too, in The Shop Around the Corner.
Okay, so I kind of painted myself into a corner with the criteria I gave myself for this roundup, because I wanted to do a movie that was for Christmas, because clearly I like Christmas. But I also didn't want it to be something I'd written about before, which is hard because I have written about almost all of my Christmas favorites on the blog. Surprisingly, though, I don't know how, I have not written about The Shop Around the Corner. Which is a film that is really just near and dear to me. The story has been remade as an MGM musical with Judy Garland called In the Good Old Summertime, as well as more popularly probably Nora Ephron's You've Got Mail. There's also a Broadway musical that's really good called She Loves Me. And I've seen and I love all of those, but there's just something really special about The Shop Around the Corner that I think it's the best iteration out of all of those. And I'm sure a large part of that is because it's directed by Ernst Lubitsch. He's just a magical filmmaker who really understood comedy and romance, unlike anybody else before or since his work. And Shop Around the Corner is just a really beautiful example of what he could do. I wish it was in the trailer, but this is amazing shot that I just think about all the time, where it's like a wall of post office boxes, and it zooms into the box that Margaret Sullivan and Jimmy Stewart's character use. And he hasn't written her in a long time, but it conveys that just by having her reach in for the box and kind of desperately like rooting around in the box for a letter from him and like looking and seeing it's not there. And it's all silent. There's no need to really belabor anything. It's just like a really beautiful, succinct way of conveying this character's like desperation and heartache. And there's a dramatic edge to this movie that the remakes just don't have. I won't spoil anything, but Frank Morgan's character has a subplot with his wife that is just heartbreaking. There's this line he said in this latest viewing of watching this movie, there was this line he said that was just like a dagger in my heart to me, where he is talking about his wife and says, you know, she just didn't want to grow old with me. And it's just like, it's a beautiful script from Samson Rafelson, who often collaborated with Lubitsch. But like at the same time that it's dramatic, it's also just really funny and really just incredibly romantic. Jimmy Stewart and Margaret Sullivan made 4 movies together, but she's not very well known because she was more of a stage actress. But they were close friends and like had known each other like years before either came to Hollywood. And she's actually the person who fought for him to become her leading man, and she had the clout and he didn't. And she like coached him in private and everything. So she's kind of a big reason why we have the Jimmy Stewart we have, and yet we don't really know her that well. But she's great in this movie, and Jimmy Stewart is just spectacular. I mean, I love him in everything. He's my second favorite actor behind Cary Grant. But I especially love 1930s, 1940s Jimmy Stewart, because there's just something like really adorable and sweet about him in that period. And he's just so good in this movie that you don't even care. He's supposed to be Hungarian. Like, it doesn't matter. Also, I realized while I was watching this movie that he's kind of become like the unofficial king of like classic Hollywood Christmas movies, because he has this, It's a Wonderful Life, and Bell Book and Candle, which highly recommend all of those. All fantastic. So had any of you seen Shop Around the Corner before, or like knew what it was?
I had. I'm a very big Lubitsch fan, and I'd actually seen it once when I was younger, and again a couple years ago, and it was really great rewatching it this time ago.
Yeah, I think this movie is really awesome. I love Lubitsch too. I think this is like, I haven't seen every Lubitsch movie, but I feel like of the ones I've seen, this is like his sweetest movie. I mean, you know, something like Trouble in Paradise or like the early musicals are just so like naughty, and like there's definitely sexuality in this movie, but like this one's just so sweet. I love it. And like I read something that Lubitsch said about how so many of his movies at Paramount were set in Paris, but it was nothing like the real Paris. That he said like Paramount Paris is preferable to the real Paris. And I know that this movie's set in Budapest, but there seems to be something interesting there, like with Lubitsch's like Hollywood visions of European cities that I dig.
Yeah, there's a moment towards the end of the movie where it's snowing, and the snow in this movie, it's like the best looking snow you'll ever see in your life. There's just like a way that it floats that is just really like I don't know, it's just spellbinding to me.
I had never seen this movie, and also this was my first Ernst Lubitsch movie ever. Shout outs to Jesse Balzer, who was kind enough to buy me To Be or Not to Be at the Criterion sale this year. I have not gotten around to it yet, but like I watched this and Broken Lullaby like in pretty close succession because I had to review it for like my physical media reviews. And I've seen You've Got Mail before, actually not as many times as I would like to have seen it, but like I was just so taken aback by like I enjoy like and I truly don't want to paint myself as this like really dark person, but like I really do enjoy that like fusion of like romance and then like the darker elements with the shopkeeper's like wife and things going on with them in the background, and just like I don't know how everyone's just kind of like trying to help each other and I don't know, those human relationships and like kind of like the soothing of each other's pains and like coming together and all that stuff. Like I've enjoyed that about Lubitsch's work so far. And this is I would like to make this part of like my yearly Christmas movie rotation.
It's amazing how much chemistry Sullivan and Stewart have. It's just like the final scene where they're like, you know, he's finally revealing, I'm your pen pal and we're in love and blah, blah, blah. Just like the way, and you saw a little piece of it in the trailer, like the way he just looks at her, it's like, oh my. It's very...
Yeah. Well, apparently a lot of his biographies and his friends say that he was in love with her.
Oh, and that comes across on screen.
Yeah, they say like there was just a spark about him, like as soon as he was acting opposite her. And she actually was married to his best friend, Henry Fonda, for like 2 years. She was a very interesting person. She had a lot of issues and it's pretty complex, but yeah, apparently he did love her, so that's cute. Okay, so I think we're ready for we went a little long as we want to do, but we're ready for the Q&A portion. So Alyssa, if you want to return.
Yeah, we have a lot of good questions coming in. I have one first for Laura. This is about the music, and Kathy notes that the music was really compelling in the trailer and asks what impact do you think it had on the film overall and whether it'd be different with different music.
Oh yeah, the soundtrack of this film, both the composition and then the sound effects. So we hear human voices, and you get that in the trailer, that kind of like so there's like that's kind of the type of human voices we hear across the film. So it's more like emotive, but there's no actual like dialogue. Yeah, the film communicates a lot through the soundtrack, and that's true of a lot of animated films like this where you don't have dialogue. There's a lot that's carried in the soundtrack to help like kind of supplement the meaning. And I do think that like, because like the male voices are so gruff, they're like very like and they're constantly like coughing, like because they smoke a lot, so they're always like you know, so you get like this kind of this characterization of the masculine shoes as being like very like gruff, and you know, it kind of goes along with the way they're kind of depicted as like lazy and domineering. And then the red shoes, the feminine shoes, they have like this very kind of like sweet voice. So like the mother, she's very like you know, like I don't know, I'm not a good voice actor, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that the film would be the same if it didn't have such a compelling and artful soundtrack. The composer and the sound designer did such an excellent job with the film.
Yeah. All right, we have one from David. This one is for Jack. You touched upon the episodic nature of I Remember Mama as thing that you've seen in modern film. Not, do you think a modern audience will a film like this now?
I'm sorry. I think that there was a problem with the audio for a moment.
Oh, sorry. I'll say it again. Are you hearing me okay now?
Yeah.
Cool. So this is from David. He asks, you touched upon the episodic nature of I Remember Mama, and wonders if this is something you've seen in any modern films, and if not, how do you think a modern audience would respond to that or follow it?
I think that, well, maybe this is obvious, but so many people consume contemporary content through like series. So that's like a very episodic format that a lot of people are used to now. So maybe the jump to just like an episodic narrative film like I Remember Mama wouldn't be that much of a leap, really, because so many people watch things in that format. And like, I mean, I still think that even in feature films, there are still episodic films, and that's just like that's like a narrative archetype that goes back to like novels. Like some storytellers just prefer to tell their stories in like a more scattered moment to moment way. So I think that, you know, it's just like a decision that people have to make in terms of like what storytelling style is going to best serve the material. I think that plenty of people would still really love I Remember Mama. I think it's a wonderful film that a lot of people would still resonate with. So good question.
Yeah. Also about your film, but I think this was something that David mentioned. Amanda asked if you could talk more about the Little Women influences. Either of you, Jack, if you noticed that, or also David, if you wanted to expand on that.
I've never read Little Women. I just saw the Greta Gerwig version. So David, maybe you should take this one.
I mean, it was just the way it was formatted. If you have this, like, one of the daughters become a writer who is writing about their childhood and like all of their siblings. I think at one point, so I watched the movie like 2 weeks ago at this point, but I think either Katz or somebody are named like Joe, Beth, and one of the other Little Women. Like there's like a direct reference to Little Women in it, but like, you know, but the idea of this being like a nostalgia play, and then like, you know, looking back on like central figures in like one person's life, and then like writing about it, and like her actually, you know, becoming a writer, being a part of the narrative, which is like an important part of Little Women as well. It just seemed as if it was heavily influenced by Little Women, but maybe that is just the nature of like a nostalgia play for all I know.
Yeah, plus like so many scenes being like playing out in the home seems important, at least in the version of Little Women I saw.
Yeah.
Jack, you should watch the Gillian Armstrong version of Little Women. That's my personal favorite. I think you would like it. Both are great though.
You're not the first person that's told me I need to get on that. So
yeah, it's amazing. And it's perfect for this time of year too. So yeah, check it out. I have another one for Laura. This person asks, you talked about objects in animation and the way that their movement can evoke human feeling and sentiment in the viewer. Do you feel like animated human characters have their humanity enhanced by the medium? Do you feel like they lose anything by being clay or ink instead of flesh and blood?
This, I think, really depends on the treatment of the artist, like how they approach their characters. So, you know, I'm trying to think of some examples where, you know, there was several years ago, there was that Pixar short with the moon that's just like devastating to watch. It's like, you know, it's like you're crying because they're like, you know, when they're like raking up the stars. I don't know. It's and you know, something like that. It's I feel like animation can kind of help us tap into some things that are maybe more difficult with like human actors. But I mean, for every example of that, there's like, you know, like I think that I don't know that I would say like Wallace and Gromit, they do a lot of like really interesting things with the medium, and it's very like tactile, but I don't know if what they're doing is like enhancing the humanity of Wallace through the treatment of that particular character. So I don't know. I think it just kind of depends. But there is a lot of research in animation about like how it works, that we can empathize with lines or clay. because we know they're not real, we know they're not human. I mean, like particularly like you can have like very simple line animations that are very emotive, that draw a lot of really interesting stories and themes that people like. You see it as a character when you're watching it, and you respond to it as if it's a real character. And that has to do with like this natural tendency in our brain that called mimesis, where we have this kind of like natural tendency that's like biological toward empathy, and animation taps into that natural kind of biological tendency in our brains.
Thanks. All right, we have time for just a couple more. Is one in from Ava, that's for David. Michaela mentioned that the runtime and pacing of Hateful Eight was off-putting to her. If you were to cut a slightly abridged version for her, is there anything you immediately think is unnecessary? Are there any scenes that you think don't necessarily hold the plot together, but that you think are tonally crucial, like the Muppets song?
There isn't one particular scene I would cut. It's really funny because the roadshow version of this movie is technically longer. There's like a whole chicken plucking scene that's excluded from it. Yeah, I know. I would say there's no particular scene I would cut, and I'm gonna say this because I'm willing to admit it. Quentin Tarantino is a writer who is in love with his own writing, and so you wouldn't cut a particular scene, but there are paragraphs of dialogue that are not necessary for this movie. He enjoys hearing it, and he has final cut on his movie. So yes, there is like an extended cut of Hateful Eight, including hey, guess what? There's a second extended cut on Netflix you can watch right now that's like paced like a TV show. But yeah, I would just cut like there's just whole monologues and like dialogue. You could cut this into an expedited version, like. And, I'm even willing to admit there is a much tighter, more pleasant version of this movie to watch, and it's called Knives Out. So,
Yes.
Yes. Which I also enjoy, just two sides of the same coin. But yeah, I would just cut, you could trim this. Just go through, you could cut whole sentences, whole paragraphs.
All right, I'm going to ask one more two-part question, which is for each of you guys. What would you say is your favorite holiday movie that you didn't talk about tonight? And
oh no, you froze, Alyssa. Oh no.
Oh no. I mean, we heard some of the question.
We heard the first part.
Okay, so favorite holiday movie we haven't talked about tonight.
There's so many. I'm gonna go with Elf. I love Elf so much.
I'm wearing my Leon the Snowman pin. And I also have my "You Sit on a Throne of Lies" mug.
Oh, I love it. Oh my goodness.
So
every time I watch it, there's a new delight.
Right? I would one of my favorites, it's hard for me to narrow it down to one, but one I'll point out is that Christmas in Connecticut is amazing with Barbara Stanwyck. She's so good in that movie. It's a really funny rom-com. We were joking last night during our rehearsal that Shop Around the Corner has thirsty Jimmy Stewart. Christmas in Connecticut is full on thirsty Barbara Stanwyck. It's her like pretending she's married, but like full on lusting after Dennis Morgan. And it is delightful. So highly recommend that one.
I think for me, I'm actually going to go with a Western, but it's a Christmas Western. It's Three Godfathers, which is a John Ford movie, but it's I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it's about three men who find a baby in the desert. So it's like very much like the Three Wise Men. And it's like a Christian parable of sorts. But I also love a movie called Remember the Night a lot, which has Fred McMurray, and it's one of my favorite Christmas films too.
Yeah, that one's great. And it has Barbara Stanwyck too. So
yeah.
Jimmy Stewart, king, she is queen of classic Hollywood Christmas.
Totally.
You go, David. No, you go, man.
I was gonna say, I'll bounce off of Jax and say Tokyo Godfathers, a movie heavily inspired by John Ford's Three Godfathers and the Three Wise Men tale, which will be screening at Cicada Cinema in a week from now. So yeah, I love that movie. It's by the late great Satoshi Kon and written by Keiko Nobumoto, who recently just sadly passed away at the age of 57. It's about three unhoused people who find a baby on Christmas Eve and have to, decide if they want to keep it or find its mother. And it's just one of those like humanist pieces that I love so much, which is about like the human condition and like people finding each other and like making like your own found family and like working through their pain on Christmas Day, because Christmas, one of those lonely times of the year where found family comes into play pretty heavily. And I just love the animation in that movie so much.
Mine is probably Love Actually. I enjoy The Holiday too. My mom is a huge fan of that movie, and I watch it with her at some point every year, at least a little bit. But I just love like the opening where all the family's at Christmas, and then I also just like the stories and the way that it's kind of a little bit of a Robert Altman movie because of all the interlinked stories and plot lines and all the many characters, and just really get caught up in the emotion of it and the humor and like all the great songs. And I love the ending when everybody's reuniting at the airport. And before I flew out to see my family for the first time in over a year because of COVID, I watched a lot Love Actually in total, but I was very moved by the ending because I was like, that's going to be me in a little bit. I can't wait for that. So I like Love Actually a lot.
Is there a second part to your question, Alyssa, before?
Yeah, sorry about my internet. The second part is the most important to me, which is if you were to remake that movie that you talked about as a Muppet movie, who would you keep as the human?
Who would we keep as the what?
As the human character, like the Michael character.
That seems kind of obvious. Like I think like the dad, James Caan, has to stay the human.
Absolutely. And you've got to keep Barbara Stanwyck in Christmas in Connecticut. You can't replace Stanny.
I agree.
I think in mind, like John Wayne is the obvious straight man, and then everybody else is a Muppet. Like that would be classic, right?
For mine, you keep the baby. Just the baby. Everyone else is a Muppet.
For mine, it's kind of hard because there's just so many different characters, but I'm really fond of Colin Firth's performance in that movie, especially when he's speaking in Portuguese to the woman he loves and there's all these people around him. I think that'd be very funny where it's just Colin Firth and then a whole bunch of Muppets just being like, like listen to him, go with her. I'll also say that I am a big Stanley Kubrick fan, and his last movie, Eyes Wide Shut, is sort of a Christmas movie. And I feel like a Muppet version of that film with only Tom Cruise as the only human would be very interesting.
It's really scary to think about.
I want to know who plays Sidney Pollack in that movie.
Sam the Eagle.
Okay, great.
Dr. Bill, it's the American way.
Wow. Okay. All right. So, we lost Alyssa and she's back. We can't kill Alyssa, guys. She just keeps coming back.
She keeps coming back.
Alyssa and I have been doing this dance of hosts, so I will let Alyssa close out and I will go away.
All right. So, Michaela, have you said anything that you needed to say?
Yeah. So, I just wanted to say, thank you to the audience for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet to the blog, I mean, hopefully you have already, but please do. I also wanted to share the news that in January, Noni Ford will be joining our team. She's used to be a volunteer usher at IU Cinema and has contributed guest posts before, so she'll be a great addition. However, we're also losing a writer, so Jack is sadly leaving us this month. This is his last event with us. So just wanted to say that we'll miss him, and he knows he's always welcome to write a guest post. So I'm sure we haven't seen the last of him. Yeah.
Not at all. Thank you, Michaela. I just want to say too, I'm really grateful for IU Cinema and for A Place for Film for allowing me to have this platform to share my writing for so many years. It's been a formative experience for me, and it's been great working with all of you too.
Jack, I'm gonna miss you so much. I love reading your writing. I learned a lot from you as a writer, and so just thank you so much. And like, I partially picked The Hateful Eight because it's a Western, and this was your last roundup. So thanks for your service.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's it for us.
Thank you all so much, Michaela, David, Jesse, and Laura, for a great conversation tonight and for the thoughtfulness and love of cinema you bring to A Place for Film every week. I'd also like to thank the entire IU Cinema team, particularly Elena, Seth, David, and Will, who have all worked behind the scenes to make this event possible. And as I mentioned earlier, this is our last event of the semester. It's been so wonderful to see many of you back in person this fall, while also continuing to bring people to virtually who can't be together in person like we did tonight. So we'll be back in person and virtually with events in January. So stay for programming updates on cinema.indiana.edu and on our Instagram, Facebook. To everyone who tuned in, thank you once again for being with us. Be well, be kind to yourselves and others. Happy holidays, and we'll see you in January. Good night.